Resident Evil has been running for nearly 30 years, and in that time, it has built one of the most genuinely interesting rosters of protagonists in all of gaming. Not because they're the strongest, or the most tactical, or the most emotionally stable, because almost none of them were supposed to be here. These are the people the franchise handed the end of the world to, and they all kept showing up anyway. Here's how each of them got there. Chris Redfield. Chris Redfield walked into the Spencer mansion in July 1998 carrying his Beretta 92FS Samurai Edge, a custom-fitted sidearm issued to senior STRS Alpha team members, against bioweapons the size of refrigerators, against things that used to be dogs. Here's the thing, Chris had no idea what he was walking into. He was a STRS Alpha team member, the guy you send when something goes wrong in the woods, not the guy you send when the woods have been replaced by a corporate bioweapons lab with a trophy zombie collection. He survived 72 hours of continuous combat with basically nothing. Scavenged tools, basic first aid, and whatever adrenaline his body had left. At one point, he stitched his own abdominal wound using dental tools from the estate's infirmary. Regular people pass out getting blood drawn. Chris used the estate dentist's kit on himself mid-mission and kept moving, which is, not ideal. That same night, a zombie scratched him in the underground lab, direct T-virus exposure. He walked it off. 5 years later, that man co-founded the BSAA, a global anti-bioterrorism organization built so nothing like the Spencer Mansion would happen again. By Resident Evil 5, his standard loadout included an FNP-90 with 50-round helical magazines. That is the loadout of a man who has completely stopped being surprised by monsters. Someone who looked at the Beretta situation and said, never again. Chris isn't the most complicated protagonist in this franchise. His arc isn't about identity or moral compromise. It's about escalating commitment. Every game raises the stakes, and Chris just keeps showing up with bigger guns. Every other protagonist on this list is a variation on the same question Chris answered in 1998. What do you do when the nightmare doesn't end? You buy a better gun and you go back in. Speaking of people who walked into the Spencer Mansion with completely inadequate equipment, Jill Valentine did the same thing, and she did it with a harder route. Jill Valentine. Jill Valentine is statistically the most repeatedly unlucky person in the entire Resident Evil franchise, and she's also the only one whose immune system became a corporate obsession. Here's the thing, most survivors in this franchise are in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jill was specifically sought out. Albert Wesker didn't want to kill her, he wanted to use her. That's a fundamentally different kind of horror, and it's what separates her from every other protagonist on this list. It starts on July 23rd, 1998. STRS Alpha Team deploys to the Arklay Mountains, and Jill arrives at the Spencer Mansion carrying her own Beretta 92FS Samurai Edge, the same class of custom weapon issued to Alpha Team members. She survived, which is either a testament to her abilities or proof that the universe simply refused to let her die in peace. She then survived Raccoon City collapsing in 1998, 2 outbreaks, back to back within the same year. Most people don't survive one, but here's where it gets complicated. The BSAA filed medical records in January 2000 documenting her PTSD diagnosis, citing recurring nightmares and hypervigilance following Raccoon City. She kept fighting anyway, not because she shrugged it off, but in spite of the fact that she hadn't. That distinction matters. Then, in 2006, during a raid on the Spencer estate, Wesker arrived and Jill tackled him through a window to save Chris. Neither body was recovered. For the next 2.5 years, Jill was held captive by Wesker, who had discovered something extraordinary. Her prior T-virus exposure had generated antibodies that were uniquely useful in his Ouroboros research. He wasn't done with her yet. Her body became the biological foundation for the most dangerous virus he ever developed. She was controlled via a P-30 drug device attached to her chest and deployed against her own allies until Chris and Sheva finally removed the device in 2009 and brought her back. By Resident Evil 3, her loadout had evolved to a custom Beretta with enhanced stopping power and a G18C machine pistol for close engagements. Which makes sense. When you've learned that zombies are genuinely the least of your problems, you upgrade accordingly, and if Jill's bad day started with the wrong field assignment, wait until you hear about the rookie cop who showed up to his first day of work and accidentally stumbled into the apocalypse. Leon S. Kennedy. Leon S. Kennedy showed up to his first day of work on September 29, 1998, and Raccoon City had already decided it was done existing. That is not an exaggeration. His patrol route started, the T-virus outbreak hit its peak, and he had not completed a single shift before the city became a biological catastrophe he would spend the next decade cleaning up. His starting loadout was a Matilda, a 9mm handgun with a standard magazine. The kind of thing you carry when the worst case scenario is a shoplifter, not a city full of reanimated civilians trying to eat your face. Here's the thing about Leon's arc. It's basically a joke about terrible timing that stops being funny and starts being tragic about halfway through. He didn't choose bioterrorism, it chose him. On day one, before he'd even filed paperwork. But the rookie thing is only half the story. By 2004, he was operating as a US government agent with direct presidential clearance, deployed solo into rural Spain to extract the president's daughter. The guy who showed up to his first shift, barely armed, became one of the most trusted field operatives in the country. His weapon loadout reflects exactly that shift. The Matilda gave way to a customized handgun with laser sight and stock attachment, which is less I am surviving this and more I have done this enough times to have preferences. And here's where it gets genuinely complicated. In that same 2004 mission, Leon was captured and directly infected with the Las Plagas parasite by Osman Sadler. He spent the remainder of that operation carrying an active parasite in his body, while simultaneously trying to extract Ashley Graham and dismantle the entire cult infrastructure around him. He got the parasite removed at the end, which is good, because the alternative was becoming a mind-controlled servant of a Spanish religious extremist, which is, not ideal. The transition from overwhelmed rookie to ice-cold operative is the part the game's never quite addressed directly. Leon functions. He's precise. He's effective. He's exactly what the government needed him to become. Whether becoming that was good for him is a different question entirely, and one nobody in his chain of command seems particularly interested in asking. Claire Redfield, meanwhile, was doing all of this without a government salary or a clearance level, which honestly makes her story hit differently. Claire Redfield. Claire Redfield arrived in Raccoon City on September 29, 1998, riding a Harley-Davidson motorcycle looking for her brother. She wasn't a soldier, she wasn't an agent. She was a college student who showed up as the outbreak peaked, armed with a Browning HP and absolutely zero preparation for what was waiting for her. That's the thing about Claire that the franchise never quite lets you sit with. Every other protagonist on this list had some version of training, credentials, or institutional backing. Claire had a leather jacket and a handful of rounds. The rest she figured out from whatever the city's dead left behind, which is how you end up wielding a grenade launcher at the end of Resident Evil 2. Not because you planned it that way, but because survival has its own curriculum. Here's where it gets genuinely uncomfortable. During the Rockford Island escape, she survived multiple explosions, exposure to fire, and environments that would hospitalize most people. No recovery arc, no cutscene dedicated to it. She just kept moving, which is either inspiring or deeply concerning, depending on how much you think about it. But the biology of Claire's story is what really separates her from the rest of the list. During the 2011 TerraSave facility incident on Suchestvovany Island, she was exposed to the T-Phobos virus and spent days contagious before her body suppressed it through sheer emotional regulation. T-Phobos activates on fear, and Claire refused to give in to it. Her body essentially did the research so she didn't have to, which is, not ideal as a survival mechanism, but it worked. What she did with all of that is the part nobody talks about enough. Claire joined TerraSave, a civilian humanitarian organization built specifically to respond to corporate bioweapon programs. She didn't go work for the government, she didn't join the BSAA, she committed to civilian advocacy because she watched what happened when the institutions meant to protect people either failed or actively caused the damage. Every other protagonist on this list ends their arc by becoming better at fighting. Claire's ends with her trying to make sure other people never have to fight at all. That's the only character development in this franchise that lands somewhere other than a bigger gun. And then there's the one who was doing all of this at 18 on her very first field assignment, while also building a cure from scratch. Rebecca Chambers. Rebecca Chambers is either the most underrated protagonist in the entire franchise, or proof that everyone who plays these games has been paying attention to completely the wrong person. Let me explain. She's 18 years old. She's the team medic, not a frontline soldier. And while every combat-trained STRS veteran in that mansion was busy emptying magazines into zombies and generally just trying not to die, Rebecca Chambers was in the laboratory solving the underlying problem. On July 24th, 1998, under active zombie siege conditions, she synthesized a treatment from plant alkaloids she found in the Spencer Mansion's own lab. Not a commercial-grade cure, but a working antidote capable of slowing early-stage viral mutation before it became irreversible. She built it from scratch, alone, while things with no faces were trying to eat her, which is, not ideal working conditions for a biochemist. Here's the thing about Rebecca that nobody talks about. She came prepared in a way the combat veterans absolutely did not. Her medical bag contained a substantial field pharmacy, serum vials, trauma kits, specialized anti-venom. The soldiers brought guns, Rebecca brought medicine, and she needed it. She sustained infected scratches during Bravo Team's initial Arclay encounter, requiring constant antibiotic injections just to stop herself from turning. She was treating herself while treating everyone else, while synthesizing a cure while surviving. The multitasking alone is exhausting to think about. Her antidote wasn't just theoretically useful either. It's the treatment used in Resident Evil Zero's epilogue to successfully slow Billy Cohen's exposure. The medic built the most functional countermeasure against the T-virus the franchise has ever shown on screen. Then she joined the US Army's Chemical Corps in 2000 and made captain by 2005. Of course she did. Ada Wong is a different story entirely. Harder to read, harder to trust, and operating on motivations that nobody fully understands, including, arguably, Ada Wong is the only person on this list who has been more identities than she has been a person. That sounds like a dramatic way to open a section, and it absolutely is, but hear me out, because the evidence is right there in front of you across 6 games and 25 years of franchise history. Not a side character, not an ally, a professional who has never once let you fully see what she actually is, and has been doing it since 1998. Her first documented operation put her in Raccoon City on September 29, 1998, the same day Leon Kennedy showed up, but where Leon was there because it was his first day on the job, Ada was there because she was working. She'd been sent to retrieve G-virus samples, operating under a cover deep enough that nobody around her knew what she actually was. Not a survivor, not a hero, an asset running a retrieval operation in the middle of a city that was actively dissolving. Her loadout reflects this exactly. No signature firearm she's carried since the beginning, no sentimental attachment to a particular weapon. She adapts. By Resident Evil 4, she's using a custom handgun and a grappling hook device she deploys with the kind of casual efficiency that makes you realize this is not her first hostile environment. Whatever works for the current job, that's not a character quirk, that's a philosophy. By the events of Resident Evil 4, she's transporting a Las Plagas sample she retrieved on behalf of Wesker. Not a souvenir, a biological payload, the kind of thing arms dealers move, the kind of thing that ends cities. And she does it while simultaneously working against the people who hired her, feeding Leon information, and walking out of Spain with everything she came for. That's the thing about Ada. She always walks out with everything she came for. Here's where it gets interesting though. Across every appearance, she is never fully explained. Her true name, her actual allegiances, her real motivations, classified, in-universe, and to the player. Resident Evil 6 gives you an entire campaign from her perspective, and still doesn't answer the core questions. The writers aren't forgetting to fill in the gaps. The gaps are the characterization. The ambiguity isn't a flaw in Ada's writing. It's the whole point. You don't get access to the person underneath the cover, because there may not be a version of her that exists outside of one. Which is almost refreshing, honestly. Carlos Oliveira, by contrast, wears everything on his sleeve, which made his situation considerably messier to survive. Carlos Oliveira walked into Raccoon City as a UBCS operative during the worst urban bioweapon disaster in American history. Most people spend their first real deployment figuring out the basics. Carlos spent his figuring out how to not die in a city that was actively eating itself alive. The Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service dropped him into Raccoon City during the September 1998 outbreak. He was technically working for the company that caused it. That detail matters. Carlos wasn't a hero who stumbled into a nightmare. He He was a mercenary on Umbrella's payroll, dropped into the consequences of Umbrella's experiments, and the game is honest enough not to pretend that's a comfortable position to be in. His initial reluctance to help civilians wasn't a writing oversight. It was baked into who he was at that point in the story. He was there to do a job, not run a rescue operation, and that tension is what makes him interesting. A lot of protagonists in this franchise were always going to do the right thing. Carlos had to choose it. Here's where it gets genuinely impressive. His survival across the outbreak wasn't clean or heroic in the traditional sense. His unit got decimated. Most of his squad mates didn't make it out. Carlos kept moving anyway, pushing through a city that was actively collapsing around him, with zero institutional support and a chain of command that had already abandoned the operation. But the detail that flips everything is the T-virus infection. After Jill Valentine collapses from Nemesis's attack and falls into a coma, Carlos is the one who fights through the RPD to find a cure for her. He's not rescuing the helpless civilian. He's saving the person who, by any reasonable measure, is more capable than he is. The rescue dynamic runs completely backwards, and the game just lets that sit there without making a big thing of it. He goes out, he gets her the vaccine, and he does it while the city is hours away from being erased from the map. After Raccoon City, Carlos disappears from the main narrative, his later fate left largely open. The mercenary who took a bad paycheck watched his entire unit die, and still made the right calls at the end. It's one of the cleanest arcs in the franchise, and nobody talks about it nearly enough. Sherry Birkin's story starts at the same moment as Leon and Claire's, and in a lot of ways it's even more complicated because she didn't choose any of it. Sherry Birkin. Sherry Birkin's entire story is about decisions other people made about her body before she was old enough to understand what a body even was. Here's how it starts. September 29th, 1998. Raccoon City sewers. Sherry is a child running from monsters through underground tunnels, which is already one of the worst sentences in this entire video. Her father, William Birkin, consumed by the G-virus and operating on pure biological imperative, implants a G-virus embryo inside her. The man he used to be no longer exists in any meaningful sense. What's left moves on instinct, driven by the virus's drive to reproduce in a genetically compatible host. His closest genetic match is his own daughter. That makes Sherry the youngest documented bioweapon exposure in the franchise's history, which is a record nobody should want to hold. But here's where it gets complicated. Sherry didn't mutate. Her immature immune system responded to the virus in a way no adult immune system could replicate, accidentally creating the most durable viral resistance in the franchise. Her childhood biology, the exact thing that made her vulnerable in the first place, is what kept her alive. Her father's experiment failed because she was too young for it to work properly. Leon and Claire extracted the embryo in time, but the exposure wasn't clean. The G-virus had already done something to her cellular structure, something that didn't go away when the embryo did. Sherry walked out of Raccoon City alive, but she walked out changed, and the people who were very interested in what she'd become were already making phone calls. The US government put Sherry under observation almost immediately after the city's destruction. For years, she was effectively a ward of the state, her body treated as a research asset as much as a person who needed looking after, which is, not ideal as a way to grow up. By the events of Resident Evil 6, she's an adult working for the Division of Security Operations, specializing in bioweapon countermeasures. The survivor of her father's experiment became the government's leading expert on the experiment. There's something genuinely bittersweet about that. She is, objectively, the most qualified person alive to fight the thing that was done to her, because the thing that was done to her never fully went away. Every step of Sherry's life was shaped by someone else's choice. Her father's ambition, the government's interest in what her survival meant. She didn't choose any of it. She just survived it and then built a career out of the wreckage. That's either inspiring or devastating, depending on how long you think about it. Ethan Winters, coming up next, has his own version of this story, except his starts with a door he probably should not have opened. Ethan Winters. Ethan Winters is the most unremarkable person in this entire franchise. No military background, no government clearance, no special operations training, systems engineer, civilian. The kind of guy who probably had a gym membership he never used, and a fantasy football team he cared about too much, and his body became the most extraordinary biological case study Resident Evil has ever produced. Here's where it starts. In 2017, Ethan drives to a derelict plantation in Dolby, Louisiana because his wife sent him a message after 3 years of being declared dead. He walks in, she attacks him, and then it just keeps going for 48 hours straight. A 9mm pistol and a survival knife against an entire plantation of molded creatures. No evac, no backup, no tactical training to fall back on. Just a civilian who refused to stop moving. Then Mia cuts his hand off with a chainsaw. And here's the thing about that, because he lost his hand, is underselling what actually happened. The mold that had been colonizing his biology regenerated the hand using bioorganic tissue. He did not lose the hand so much as accidentally upgrade it, which is, you know, not ideal, but also extraordinary. What the games eventually reveal is that Ethan had actually died during his initial encounter with Jack Baker in that very first hour. The mold resurrected him. Every severed limb he reattached with a tube of first aid solution, every wound he walked off, every moment he kept moving through damage that would have killed anyone else, all of it was the mold doing the work. The most ordinary protagonist in the franchise had been running on borrowed biology the entire time, and didn't know it. By February 2021, when Village begins, the mold integration in his body had progressed to the point where his regenerated hand had developed the ability to physically shield Rose from threats before Ethan's conscious mind had even processed the danger. His own biology had started making protective decisions without him. The man who had no training, no special powers, no reason to survive any of this, had been so thoroughly transformed by everything he'd endured that his body was protecting his daughter on instinct, operating independently of his will. Director commentary confirmed Ethan was always the original human, not a mold clone, which makes every severed limb, every time he kept walking through something that should have killed him permanently, retroactively worse. He was a civilian who got quietly converted by a biological horror and never stopped moving toward his family anyway. Not because of training, not because of expertise, because Rose was at the end of it, which makes what comes next hit differently, because Rose inherited everything her father went through and she didn't get a choice about any of it. Rosemary Winters. Every protagonist in this franchise had a moment before, a day they were normal. Chris had his career, Leon had his commute, even Ethan had a quiet life in Los Angeles before it all went sideways. Rosemary Winters had zero of that. She was born with the Megamycete's power already inside her, which means the horror didn't find her. She was born inside it. From infancy, she was already something different, something that made the BSAA nervous enough to monitor her entire childhood. Before she could understand what she was, organizations were already afraid of what she might become. Most babies learn to grip things around month 3. Rosemary skipped normal development milestones entirely and went straight to being a classified security concern, which is one way to grow up. Here's where it gets hard to sit with. Rosemary didn't just carry traces of the Megamycete, she was its vessel. Her father Ethan, who spent Resident Evil 7 and Village being systematically destroyed and rebuilt by the mold, was functionally made of the stuff by the end, but even he was a product of exposure. Rosemary didn't survive a virus. She is, at a biological level, a being born from the Megamycete itself, and the only reason she retained her humanity is because of Ethan's sacrifice, his calcification destroying the Megamycete while allowing her to keep its power without being consumed by it. Ethan literally crystallized himself, gave up his entire existence, and that specific act is the reason his daughter exists as a person, and not a vessel for a fungal superorganism. He died before she was old enough to understand any of it. By her mid-teens, she had achieved enough control over her powers to generate protective barriers and manipulate the mold at will. Skills it took the entire franchise 25 years of Protagonist suffering to build toward. The franchise started with trained soldiers getting torn apart by horrors they weren't prepared for. It ends with a teenager who was the horror, learning to use it on her own terms. And then there's the Shadows of Rose DLC, set inside the Megamycete's consciousness. Rosemary willingly entered the mind of the thing she was born from, looking for a way to lose her powers, to be normal. The franchise began with veterans cracking under pressure. It ends with a teenager who had accumulated enough existential dread to want to cut out a piece of her own biology before finishing school. Rosemary is the terminus. Every exposure, every adaptation, every protagonist who survives something they shouldn't have, it all ends here, with a kid who inherited the full power of a fungal god and is still standing. Her father spent everything destroying the Megamycete to protect her. She was already part of it. He just didn't know it yet. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to see more, click the video on screen now.